How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. This is Mike. I'm back to do part 3 of my list of my top 100 favorite films. So today we're going to do, let's see, numbers 60 through 41, 20 films. All right. Now, the first film I want to talk about is one that I don't own as yet, but I will because I like this film very much. It's a 2017 film that was released in the United States in 2018, Lean on Pete, directed by Andrew Hay. And it stars Charlie Plummer as a 15-year-old boy named Charlie Thompson, who is living with his single father, played by Travis Fimmel. And they have a very chaotic, imperfect life, but they love each other. And Charlie goes to work for Steve Buscemi, who's the owner of a stable of racehorses. And he gets very attached to a retired racehorse named Lean on Pete. So it's a story not of a boy and his dog, but a boy and his horse. Well, things in Charlie's life start to get complicated. His father dies very suddenly, which means that as a minor, he's going to be pulled into a system that he doesn't want to be in. And he also finds out that Lean on Pete is about to be destroyed. So Charlie runs away with the horse. It may sound like a very trite plot. It isn't. It's a beautiful story, beautifully acted, and it will absolutely break your heart. Charlie Plummer is going to be, I think, one of our best actors. I hope so, anyway. All right, next up, Carnival Souls, which is a horror classic, low-budget cult classic that I fell in love with this movie just by reading about it before I ever saw it. 1962, Candice Hilligus, in only one of 2 films in which she appeared in, does a very good job as a young woman named Mary Henry, who is studying to be an organist. And one afternoon, she's involved in a car accident with some other girls. The car goes off a bridge into this filthy water, and the car is lost. Well, seems like days later, all of a sudden, Mary comes out of the water, totally covered with mud and not knowing where she is and what's going on. And nobody can figure out, how does she survive? How does she survive this crash and being in the water so long? It gets very complicated. Great imagery. The only film directed by a guy named Herc Harvey, who had done, he had made a living making industrial films, and they're all included. At least most of them are on this little box set from Criterion. Absolutely essential viewing for people who want to know about cult movies. Next up is one of my all-time favorites. This is Educating Rita from 1983. It is it's an English film starring Julie Walters as a young woman, a working-class woman in Liverpool who wants more for her life. She wants to get an education. She's married, sort of happily, but her husband is not in favor of her studying. All she wants to do is study literature and try to improve herself. So she goes to what is called Open University, which means she goes to a private meeting with a teacher. It's played by Michael Caine, who is going to instruct her and give her advice about reading, and she's going to do some research papers, etc., etc. So a lot of it is very funny, but it's also very serious because it really looks into the heart of this woman who just wants to be more and wants to do more with her life. And I happened to see this when I was in England back in 1984, my only trip to England, and it's always meant a lot to me. So anyway, next up, another English film. This is Ghost Stories, which is a 2017 or 2018 film. I'm not sure. But anyway, I just saw it this year, and it is absolutely one of the best horror films I have seen in decades. I just recommend this so highly. It's about a man named Professor Goodman who has spent his life debunking claims of supernatural occurrences. And he is, it's 10 o'clock. Yes. He is asked to investigate 3 stories that might actually change his mind, and he gets pulled into these incredible stories. Lots of twists and turns, a very creepy ending, and it's all done with incredibly horrific imagery and almost no violence, which for someone like me who doesn't like violence in films, that's definitely a plus. So I highly recommend Ghost Stories. All right. Next up is a silent film from 1921, a Swedish film, The Phantom Carriage, directed by Victor Sjöström, who also stars in the film. I've only seen this once. It's absolutely beautiful. So it's kind of hard for me to talk about the plot, but it has to do with sin and redemption and forgiveness. Victor Solstrom plays a man named David who, at the beginning of the film, is getting drunk in a graveyard and telling the story to some of his drunken friends about this legend where if the last person who dies before the stroke of midnight at the end of the year will be the one who has to drive death's carriage for the following year and retrieve all of the souls of the recently dead. It's kind of a creepy story. David is a very complicated person who has fallen from grace. He has hurt his family. He is in a flashback. It tells all the things he's done in his life that have brought him into degradation. It's almost like it could be another book of Job. It could be right next to the book of Job in the Old Testament if this were a book. And it's fascinating. So I've only seen it once. I need to see it again. All right. Next up is an early example of film noir, directed by Fritz Lang, 1937. You Only Live Once, starring Sylvia Sidney and Henry Fonda. Fantastic movie. I just saw this for the first time this year, and just was totally blown away by it. Another film about sin and redemption. In a way, it's kind of a typical film noir story about a man and a woman who love each other desperately, and his sins ruin both of their lives. She is so totally attached to this man. Henry Fonda has been in prison, and this young woman who just adores him is waiting for him to get out of prison so they can start a new life. But he has a very pessimistic attitude. The world, the society around him will not help him to change and make a new life, so he falls back into crime, and he takes her with him. And it's an amazing story. Very melodramatic, but very well acted. And Sylvia Sidney is one of those kind of forgotten actors from the 1930s, and that's a shame because she was really wonderful. So, yeah, You Only Live Once. Next up is one of my all-time favorite science fiction movies from the 1950s. It, The Terror from Beyond Space, 1958, which is sort of is said to be by fans and critics to be sort of the idea that was behind the movie Alien. It's all about people going onto a planet to do exploration. They bring back a monster. They don't realize it until it's much too late, and it's very well done. Some violent scenes for the 1958 era. For that era, it was surprisingly graphically violent in some of the scenes, and the monster is kind of cool. So Marshall Thompson, Anne Duran, it's just a great movie, and I never get tired of watching it. Next up is one of my favorite films from my beautiful lady Tuesday Weld, Pretty Poison from 1968. Anthony Perkins and Tuesday Weld, and she plays the title role, by the way. It's all about a young man who has been spending his life at an institute, spending many years at an institution because he set a fire when he was a kid that killed somebody. So he's been treated for his mental illnesses, and now he's supposedly okay to go back into society, goes to a small town, gets a job in a factory, and he meets this beautiful young high school girl named Sue Ann Stepanek, who turns out to be a little more disturbed than he is. And it's beautifully done. It actually plays like, when I watch this, I feel like I'm watching a made-for-TV movie of the week. It just seems to have that kind of atmosphere and that kind of photography and that kind of music. And yet, the twists and turns in the story are almost the more effective because it seems like such a benign film. And it's quite a surprise. Tuesday Weld is incredible. All right, next up is another film from 1958, low-budget Vincent Price classic, The Bat, which is one of these films that I can watch again and again and again, and I do. And even though I know every word of dialogue and everything that's going to happen, I still love it. Agnes Moorehead is in it. She actually has the starring role. She's in it more than Vincent Price, the one starring role of her career, and it's a very good movie, The Bat, an old-fashioned, old dark house movie made in 1958. Okay, next up, for people in my fallen generation, Woodstock, the movie from 1970, which is a a documentary about Woodstock, the event from 1969, which actually was one weekend, and then Woodstock, the movie, released about a year, well, several months later anyway, turned Woodstock, the event, which was kind of a mess, into Woodstock, the nation. Woodstock, the idea. Great concert film. Actually, it's not one of the best concert films ever made. Some of the music is not all that terrific, quite frankly, but it's just the atmosphere, the way they filmed, the people around it, all the things that were happening, the rain, the mud, the way it ended with Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner, looking out over all the piles of junk and debris that were left by the people. Great film. Great film. Next up is one of the best films of the 1930s, Stage Door from 1937. Katharine Hepburn, Ginger Rogers, Adolphe Menjou. It's all about, actually it was originally a stage play, and it's about a group of young would-be actresses who live in this theatrical boarding house called the Footlights Club in New York. And it just talks about all their lives, focusing on Ginger Rogers and Katharine Hepburn. Ginger Rogers, of course, is a woman from very working class background who was forced to room with Katharine Hepburn, who happens to be a rich girl, has more money than she knows what to do with, but she wants to live in this atmosphere because she's always wanted to do something on her own and become an actress. And it's really a terrific movie. It's very funny, but it's also very serious. We get to see Gail Patrick, we get to see Ann Miller, who was only 14 years old at the time. We get to see Lucille Ball, and we get to see Eve Arden and a lot of other sort of forgotten actresses from the 1930s. Next up is one of my favorite thrillers, The Incident from 1967. I've talked about this film endlessly. I still love it. Tony Musante and Martin Sheen play a couple of overgrown juvenile delinquents in New York City who get wildly drunk one night and get on a subway car and proceed to terrorize everyone in the car. And it's very hard-hitting, very well acted by everybody concerned. There's no foul language until you get to a part where the N-word is used quite frequently. And a great cast of people in the car. We have Gary Merrill, Thelma Ritter. We have Donna Mills in her first film. We have, let's see, what's the guy's name? Beau Bridges. Beau Bridges is in it. Ruby Dee. Yeah, very, very good film. Okay. Next up, everybody's favorite movie. Well, not everybody, but one of mine. Casablanca from 1943, one of the best picture of that year. Bogart, classic film, in a film that he almost didn't do because the Warner Brothers first offered it to George Raft, who turned it down. Then it was offered to Ronald Reagan, and thank God he didn't play it. And Ingrid Bergman was first, I think the first actress. Well, she was not the first one chosen. They wanted Ann Sheridan to play opposite Ronald Reagan. Ann Sheridan's pretty good, but she's not Ingrid Bergman. Great story of love and sacrifice. What can you say? You must remember this. Okay, next up, this is a film I just saw only about a week ago. Ingmar Bergman's Persona from 1966. Liv Ullmann and Bibi Andersson. I can't even begin to explain anything about this film except that it was absolutely beautiful, just really devastating, and it's something that I need to watch again and again and again. It's I don't know what to say. I would feel like a babbling fool trying to say intelligent things about Persona, especially having only seen it once. But yeah, I was very, very moved by it, very impressed. And it's interesting, excuse me, because Liv Ullmann's performance is essentially silent. I think she says about 2 words in the whole film. But yeah, absolutely worth checking out. Next is a silent film, The Marvelous Louise Brooks, Diary of a Lost Girl from 1929. This is a German film. The second film that Louise Brooks made for the director, what's G.W. Pabst? Is that Pabst? That's right, G.W., right? I should know that. Well, anyway, his name was Pabst. And great film. She made this after she did Pandora's Box. And in a way, this is, well, the imagery in this film is almost, for me, more striking than Pandora's Box. But she is one of the most photogenic and intuitive actresses that ever walked in front of a camera. all about a young woman who is living with her parents, and she is raped one night. She's only a teenager, and she becomes pregnant, and she is actually blamed for what happened, and the baby is taken away from her. She's sent to a reform school run by cruel maniacs, from which she escapes and goes into a life of prostitution. Then her life turns around again, and it's really a very interesting film, and Louise Brooks is fantastic. Next up is one of my favorite Star Trek films, First Contact. Okay, this is the best one, featuring the cast of the Next Generation TV show, all about how they go back in time to Earth when Earth is in a state of war, and Zefram Cochrane is about to discover warp drive, okay, so which is what made all the space travel and space exploration possible. So it's how the Next Generation cast gets involved with helping that to happen back in another time, and the Borg are involved. The Borg Queen is in this. It's terrific. Alfre Woodard is the sort of a guest star. She does a great job interacting with Patrick Stewart. It's really wonderful. It also has some great moments of comedy. It gives us a chance to see how funny Marina Sirtis can be when she gets drunk. It's a very good film, First Contact. Next up is Cat People from 1943, and I'm going to make a tie here with its double feature companion and sequel, The Curse of the Cat People, which came out in 1944. Of course, the story of this is one of these films were, of course, produced by Val Lewton, who created all these low-budget, sort of noirish type horror films, which did everything with atmosphere and camera angles, and instead of showing you monsters. And in this case, it's about a young woman played by beautiful Simone Simon, who believes that if she gets sexually aroused, she will turn into a cat and kill her lover, which is not a cool thing for her brand new husband. So it gets very complicated. And the sequel, Curse of the Cat People, is, even though it has the same people and it follows the same original story, it's something completely different, because it's a beautiful children's fairy tale in which you have a young actress named Ann Carter who just takes center stage, and she is truly one of the best child actresses who ever made a film, and deserves to be seen. Okay. Next up is one of my favorite Woody Allen films, and I think his best serious film after well, yeah, it's even better than Interiors, which I had on my other list. Crimes and Misdemeanors, starring, well, Woody Allen is in it, also with Alan Alda and Mia Farrow. But the main story features Martin Landau. He plays a guy named Jude Rosenthal, who was a very rich businessman and family man and philanthropist, who was a big guy in the community. And he also has a mistress, played by Angelica Houston, who is desperately in love with the man and has said, "You promised that you would divorce your wife and marry me. I'm going to come forward and I'm going to tell everyone." And he decides that he cannot live with this, and he decides to have her eliminated. And it's, again, another story about sin and redemption and the nature of good and evil. And it's beautifully done, beautifully acted by Martin Landau and Sam Waterston, who plays his rabbi. It's really a terrific film. Next up is 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's classic. This is new on my list. I've seen this film many times, and I just saw it recently. Well, last year, a few months ago, it came back to theaters for a while, and I found myself enjoying it in a way that I never had before. I don't find it slow. I don't find it ponderous. I don't find it... Well, it's still kind of confusing because I can't begin to explain what the story means. I don't really care. I just think it's a fascinating film, and I think I enjoyed it more this time than I ever had. And yeah, so probably should get a better edition than the Soul Snapcase, but this isn't too bad. I'm not complaining. All right, finally, this is a movie called The Sadist. I have 2 copies of this. The Sadist is a low-budget 1963 exploitation film based on the real-life story of Charles Starkweather, the rampaging killer who was running around with his crazy girlfriend Carol Ann Fugate, and they Before they were caught, they killed several people for, I guess they were robbing them and all that stuff. Anyway, this is played by a guy named Arch Hall Jr., who of course has made a series of films in the early 1960s, films like Egon and Wild Guitar. This is the only time he ever did a really serious movie, and he does a pretty good job. He plays crazy very well, Charlie Tibbs. And this film, to me, has so much going for it. I think it should be appreciated. The other people in the film, only one of them is a professional actor. There's a beautiful young woman named Helen Hovey who only made this film and no others, and she was not a professional in any way. She happened to be related to Arch Hall Jr., which is how she got the part, and she actually plays it beautifully. And by the end of the film, she looks like, in close-up, she looks like somebody from one of the Swedish art films. It's very violent, but the violence is done in such a way that I think that it's necessary to do it that way. It's also filmed in real time. The cinematographer was Vilmos Zsigmond. He started out doing low-budget films like this, directed by a guy named James Landis. Definitely should be seen. Okay, all right, I kept you for 21 minutes. Thank you for watching, and comments are welcome.